Well, thanks guys for coming in, and thanks so much for supporting the MBA Impact Academy project with your little baby, which we see in front of us. So maybe what would be great to start is if you can tell us just who you are and what you do and where you work.
Hi, I'm Alex DeYoung and I'm a clinical psychologist and researcher at the Children's Health Queensland with a focus on translating research evidence into clinical practice.
And I'm Nikki Walsh. I'm a lived experience coordinator and I bring my lived experience of mental health challenges as a person and as a carer into all of the research programs that we do at Children's Health Queensland and specifically the Queensland Centre for Perinatal and Infant Mental Health.
Yeah, cool. So maybe just tell us about our little friend here. So how do we get to this little fluffy toy on the table? Tell me a little bit about your friend.
So our friend Frankie has had a very important journey. So for me, this is definitely a passion project that is now coming to life or reality. So it's, I guess, grounded in years of research, understanding the impact of medical trauma from illness or injury or invasive procedures with a focus on very young children. It's quite a neglected gap in the area because it's assumed that young children are too young to be affected by traumatic events and experiences, but our research is showing that's not the case. But there's some really important things that we can do to help support their recovery. So in terms of things like strengthening their connection and relationships with their caregivers or support team, as well as being able to understand and process or talk about their experiences, even if they're too young to really verbalize that themselves, and really support with helping to, co-regulate strong emotions. So we know from this sort of larger body of research and theory about what helps and works in the trauma space. And so about 10 years ago, I collaborated with a colleague in Switzerland and we developed the first brief intervention that involved a toy and a book. And I guess through that evidence, we were able to show that we can accelerate recovery from traumatic stress if we intervene early and support parents and young children with resources and tools that are, developmentally appropriate, fun and engaging. But we hit a point where once the research funding ran out, we couldn't keep funding or producing the book and the toy, which was the core element of this intervention, what we knew was the most important piece. Thankfully at the time when I started working with the team at CHQ, we were working on the Birdie's Tree initiative, which involves a suite of books and toys to support children after natural disasters. And so that helped us come up with the idea of how we could create digital resources that could be freely available online to ensure that sort of more equitable, sustainable access. But also working with children and families in our healthcare settings to work out what is the best character and what were the important dimensions. And so through all of that, we came up with Frankie. The students at the QCH Hospital School chose the name and lots of important elements around the sensory elements of the ears, the softness and waiting for comfort. So yes, I guess that's, and then I guess it's then just drawing on the important stuff around lived experience and that co-design element to really get our little friend Frankie to life.
Yeah, cool. So tell me about your encounter with Frankie and your experiences with Frankie.
Yeah, so I obviously came into the project about 3.5 years ago, and Alex had a clear vision and a passion. She'd been working on it for over a decade at that point, and I immediately felt drawn to this project, probably more so than the other projects. I shouldn't probably say that. No, you can say that. But I experienced medical trauma when I was an infant myself. Being hospitalised for 6 months with whooping cough. And then I have a son with type 1 diabetes. And so I very much have drawn on that personal lived experience to support the team in what a parent might be looking for or what else is available out there so that we're not recreating the wheel. And also all of the networks that I have, tapping into those to create our own, group of consumers and families and health professionals, of which I think we have currently nearly 200. that we can draw on, you know, for their lived experience expertise and clinical expertise when asking things from what colour should Frankie be to, you know, would you pay for, you know, a Frankie, or what do you think of this new website we've put together? So co-design and consultation is a huge component of this project, and that's I guess the part that I'm most heavily involved in as well.
Yeah, cool, great. I guess in some senses this project, probably unlike a number of projects, this is a really human-centered project. I mean, this is not about trauma per se, it's about kids. So can you tell us a little bit about, both of you, your experiences in why is this important? Like, why is this a passion project? Why do we need Frankie? And maybe if we can, I mean, keep it as personal as you can in terms of some stories about the positive impact that this research you've been doing, which, you know, research can have a lot of different things, but research that you've been doing actually is intending and looks like it actually makes a big impact in individual humans' lives. So can you tell us some of those stories?
Yeah, so I think we know that just the experience of actually having an injury or illness can be a really painful, traumatic or scary or life-threatening experience. But there's also many aspects along that journey that can be really difficult for kids in terms of coming to hospitals where there's loud sounds, strange smells, painful procedures that are repeatedly done. And we know that it does really increase their level of distress sometimes in the beginning, but it's often not recognised as well because they're young children. It can be normalised that they're just having temper tantrums or getting emotional. They can't communicate about what that means. And parents have repeatedly told us, and other adults and health professionals, that they find it very difficult to be able to talk to children about things that are difficult or scary. So often it's just the conversations are avoided directly with the child impacted, or there's adult level conversations going on around them. And so we know with young kids, they tend to like catastrophize or misunderstand things that have happened. They don't have that sort of logical thinking that we develop as we get older. So it might be that this painful procedure, I've been held down because I was naughty, I caused this thing to happen, or children come to hospital and die if they come to hospital. And so the stories, I guess, we've heard directly of how these books have helped families have been more just providing confidence and skills or tools for parents that they can actually talk to their child about what happened. So by reading the storybooks, we've had parents tell us that they've been able to actually identify parts of the story that was really scary for the child that they hadn't realised because another part of the story was actually scary for them, or they've been able to sort of pick up or clarify things that the child didn't understand. And then I think a really key thing that we've heard is around Frankie is the feature in all of our storybooks, and the child in the book learns to use Frankie to help them cope or regulate emotions, or, you know, have that sort of sense of hope and recovery at the end. And so parents have really said that their child is really really connected with the story and the toy that goes with it, to the point that it's like, oh my God, we had a family who lost their toy, who got in touch saying, how can we replace the toy? We can't go on without this toy. But I think we've had children who've gone up and dressed as Sophie from Sophie Dances again. She went to Book Week last year, I should say, Sophie, in a wheelchair, but it was a way for her to communicate to her classmates about the experiences she had. So we find that there's different elements of the resources that kids really connect with, but it's something about having this soft toy that they really sort of feel like they understand and relate to that process.
Yeah,
so.
Cool. And Nikki, you've obviously got some first-hand experience with your kids having trauma. Tell me about your experience with working with this intervention, this idea.
Yeah, so I think I have been able to use some of the experiences that my children have had that were Frankie adjacent, but not, like a stuffed toy that was provided, or a foundation that provided, a book, and kind of give the team, an idea of how that impacted my family. So for example, my son received a book about his condition when he was hospitalised for a few weeks, when he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I remember, you know, it was just a picture book, but the thing that he got this big smile on his face, and he was like, this is just like me. And the thing that was just like him wasn't really the illness or anything like that. It was that in the book, this little boy's mum had to go home from the hospital to go and feed the pets and, you know, have a shower, and left, you know, the little boy in the hospital, but he was okay. And so my son actually was going through that book while I'd gone home to feed the dogs, you know, so I think he was like, oh, I'm not alone in this journey, number one. Reading, you know, kids will see themselves in different parts of these stories and be like, oh, I'm not alone, you know, this is something other kids have gone through too. And I think for me, the toy element is that there's so much negative for some of these children, including my son, there's so much negative association that they have with the places that the distress happened or the trauma happened. So my son, he has a lot of difficulty going anywhere near a hospital or an emergency room now, and it causes us some big problems. But the toy and the books and the different things that he got, the support that he got while he was in the hospital, is actually he likes those. So he got a little toy when he was diagnosed, and he still has that now, and he's you know, years older, he's nearly 15, he still has this stuffed toy in his bedroom, because, you know, this was, I feel like it's a positive association for him that he has to hold on to when everything else that he experienced during that time was incredibly difficult. And I think we hear that a lot from the families as well, is that when kids have to go back for appointments, for, you know, relapses, for lots of different reasons, to have that safety, you know, and being able to bring that Frankie and that toy, you know, helps them remember that there's, you know, people like them, and that it's not entirely, you know, a negative kind of experience as well. So yeah, that's been my kind of experience.
Yeah.
And I think I just wanted to add to that, reflecting on the goals or aims of Frankie and the stories we hear, is that I guess it's bringing the focus on the child and helping the child's voice come out in all of this, which is particularly important for young kids, and equipping parents with the confidence and skills to support their child. But is really becoming clear from us, from the work we've been doing in the hospital, but also from the work that the business students have done, like the real need it is for supporting the healthcare professionals or other educators directly involved in the child's care. And so we've found that Frankie can be used to model how to do a procedure or teach people how to do a procedure in a trauma-informed way to support children. We've also tailored the resources so they can be used to support kids at different phases. So one of the key things is preparing for coming to hospital, having a procedure. And so a nice example is Jilly's Big Sleep, where we worked closely with Dr. Alex Donaldson, an anaesthetist. And as part of her private practice to prepare children coming for surgery, she'll send out a link to the book and other supporting information, encourage the parents to read it with the child, you know, the night before, just so they understand what happens when you go into a theatre, what does it look like when you get a mask on your face, you know, and then have Frankie there in this book waiting with their arm bandaged like they have as well. But the thing I love the most is Alex saying that the next day the kids come in and see her in person and like, oh my God, you're Dr. Alex, because Dr. Alex is in the book. So I think, again, we're sort of trying to support multiple layers of the system around the child.
That's actually a really important point, though. I think that whole idea
it's a big one.
Of the interventions, this is paper and fabrics, but there's so much more meaning to these things, isn't it? I mean, these are things that then they actually take on a whole new meaning, particularly for a kid, but even, as you're saying, for parents and for clinicians. It actually, we transform something, you know, from something that's an inanimate object into something that actually has real meaning and real power, really, doesn't it? Which then delivers something like, you know, this makes me feel, has the child feeling like I'm not alone. I mean, that's incredible.
And I think it's really adding more positive experiences and trying to integrate those positive memories and experiences throughout what can sometimes be a very traumatic, stressful, long journey as well. So I think really bringing that positive focus on mental health and resilience, and trying to reduce the stigma around help seeking as well.
Yeah. So maybe let's have a go at seeing how you go at just talking through the 4 key resources and what the key point of each of those different books are. And Frankie.
So Frankie's Clubhouse is a multimodal suite of resources or a toolkit and designed that can be flexibly used across different phases of a child's healthcare journey, as well as different levels of intensity of interventions depending on the support needed. But the core sort of standout toy and everything is featured around is the Frankie character. So Frankie in the soft toy or plush toy version is designed to be a therapeutic tool that provides comfort, can support play, which we know is so important for children in terms of preparing for a medical procedure or processing, the experiences that they've had. And then the key thing about the toy is that Frankie features in all of the children's storybooks that we've written to support the journey. So we have Jilly's Big Sleep, which is more of a focus on helping to prepare children and families for coming to hospital for a general anaesthetic procedure. Whereas the next two books in our series, Sophie Dances Again and Max the Brave, these are more focused on supporting children who've experienced a traumatic injury, so from burns or another type of traumatic injury, whereas Sophie is more focused around the experience of being admitted to a paediatric intensive care unit for a chronic illness. And so these books are really more designed to help children to understand, process, talk about the experiences that they've had with their families, as well as building things like emotional literacy skills, like how do you name and communicate feelings, and how can you cope with strong feelings. So that's where Frankie in the books is introduced, where the child is shown using Frankie for deep breathing or just talking to the toy or playing out with the toy. What we don't have here today is the fourth book in our series, which is called Relaxing with Frankie. So that talks children through a series of deep breathing exercises like yoga moves, progressive muscle relaxation. So really helping build that capacity for mindfulness, movement, just protecting and calming the nervous system. Another book that we're just about to print and finalise is for children who've disclosed sexual abuse and need to come to hospital for a medical procedure. So really building out that suite of things, and we have a sort of a long list of books to come in this series. But yeah, they're available in printed copies as well as digitally available on our website platform to view.
So look, as part of the reason why we're here is because you guys were generous enough to offer your project up as a project for my MBA students in Impact Academy to work on to really, and I guess what I'm trying to do in Impact Academy is using this humble discovery method to help students who might be engineers, they might be lawyers, they might be medical people, they might be consultants, really helping them to understand how to solve complex problems. And in some senses, that's sort of what you've been doing with these toys, is you're trying to solve a complex problem. It's not simple. Okay, the child is hurt, they have an injury, you don't need to worry about it, it's all going to be okay. That's not going to work. It clearly doesn't work. And what you've talked about is the complexity of helping parents, helping clinicians, helping really highly trained medical professionals deal with this really complex situation of a kid who's scared and injured and you actually don't know what the outcome is. And so that's what you've done. And in some ways, I'm trying to give my students that same opportunity to learn, not necessarily about the technical detail of how do you solve trauma, but how do you solve a complex problem. And I guess they've been given this project to work on. So how do we actually turn this into something that is sustainable and scalable, because this has huge impact potential, but is in some ways struggling, like every great idea has, to try and find a way to make that the right business model or the right sort of structure to make it happen. So tell us a little bit about your experience working with the MBA students and what you learned from their process of starting in a really objective ground zero way of not knowing anything. How did that experience work out for you guys?
Overall, it's been a really positive experience, and I think really grateful that we had that opportunity to do that. And it really happened at a really key time for us as well, in terms of, I feel like we've worked out some solutions for this complex medical trauma problem we're trying to work with, but now we've hit this complexity of working in a very complex healthcare system. We're trained to be clinicians or supporting lived experience, but not trained in business models or, how you actually now distribute these in a cost-effective, sustainable way. So for us meeting, and I think we'd had a lot of roadblocks in terms of we all know this is a great idea. We know that children and families and clinicians think it's a great idea, but we can't seem to progress it to the higher levels where we need the funding, the support, investment. So for us, getting to meet with the business students, one, I think it was a bit of a confidence boost, or it helped show us that we're on the right track. Having them to come with a different lens to ask us the right sort of questions that helped us think about things, I think, in different ways. And really, I think they had ideas of a sort of a broad group of different stakeholders to talk to. And I think also the people they talked to could talk in a non-biased way, I suppose. Like they could, they weren't directly talking to us about some of the barriers or needs. So for me, it was really just helping think about the language as well. That was a big thing, I think, was helping come up with some more language on how we describe our users or the audiences that we're working with. And I think really one of the things I loved as we looked at some of the presentations and messages at the end, both teams, very kindly, were very involved the whole way through, gave us a lot of feedback and presented the findings to us at the end. But for me, one point just really made me smile and happy, and I actually took a screenshot and sent it to Nikki going, oh my God, they get it. Like, it was so nice to see the sort of students describing the journey that they'd been on and how much they understood the importance of childhood trauma and needing to find solutions to fix that. So yeah, so for me, I think that was some of the positive things, was having, people with more skilled knowledge or training in that area, and then really helping support our goals and knowing that it's an important thing to continue working on.
Yeah, cool. And what about yourself?
I think the first thing that jumps to mind is that we had made some assumptions on the basis of our personal and connections and professional connections with this work, that we didn't really have a great deal of concrete evidence for, in terms of how different groups of people felt about the, like Alex said, like we knew that parents and caregivers and clinicians loved it, and we knew that from anecdotal kind of evidence, from them. And, we knew that we had challenges in certain levels in terms of, funding models and things like that. And I think the business students in their, conversations with all of the different groups of stakeholders were able to come back and really confirm what we had a vague feeling about initially, but now we've got some evidence to move forward that, okay, this isn't our area of struggle, this isn't our barrier, this perhaps is our barrier, and we've got the evidence to back that up. So for me, that was really important to have that evidence that they'd collated that we can now use, while we're deciding what we're going to do in the future. And I think the other thing, like from it's a positive, but at the time, I think it's important to call out that it can be a bit of an uncomfortable journey at times as well, because we're so deep into the project, and we try not to consider ourselves experts, but I think eventually, at some point you do fall into this, we know this, and the students would be like, well, have you considered, X, Y, Z? And you'd be like, yeah, and we didn't consider it any further because of this. And they're like, okay, that's nice. We're going to go and consider that a little bit more. And that was actually an amazing thing, because, sometimes the things that came back were we could do more work on this. And sometimes, it was no, this really isn't going to work. But just the opening our eyes to fresh perspectives and the fact that we couldn't really say, oh no, don't bother working on that part. We don't think that's, very useful, and have them go, oh, well, we're just going to have a little look at it anyway. And the things that came back were exceptionally useful. So I think the process itself was very, it supported us opening our minds to new possibilities and new things that we had previously closed ourselves off to because of the environment and the systems in which we work, that the students were able to go, well, look, we've got, all of this feedback and all of this evidence that maybe it is something you should, look at. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, cool. I think one of the things that was really, really interesting for me was because there was a number of students and they're all going around talking to lots of different humans, and they're talking in a really naive sense. They don't really know anything in great detail like you do, but they got the vision. And I think there was a couple of interesting moments, I think, during the project, one of which when we had the cyclone coming across and they were talking to parents and teachers, and both parents and teachers were really anxious about this cyclone coming across the coast. And one of the students told me that she talked to a parent, or he talked to a parent and said, look, I just don't know what to say. I don't know how to have this conversation. This seems very scary. It's not scary, maybe like medical trauma, but it was nevertheless scary. And I think in some senses what they reflected to me is that just opened the door to something that you've developed for medical trauma. But trauma is, in some senses, maybe it's not exactly trauma is not trauma, but I guess when children are scared about something, and when parents don't know what to do about that, that's a situation that it seemed like some of the things you've developed, had real potential. And I think what that did in my mind is it just changed the lens from something that's very focused on emergency departments in hospitals. And one of the students said it really well. This could be for domestic violence, family violence shelters. This could be for asylum-seeking kids. This could be for kids just scared about going to school for the first time, and maybe parents that are scared about their kids going to school for the first time. So, and I know that's not what you invented it for, but I think what was really interesting is when you had this lens of developing it for the purpose you developed it for, but some other people looked at it and said, well, yeah, that's going to be awesome, but and maybe this is something you have to do to make it sustainable and scalable, and maybe something you get to do because that actually what you've developed is something that's a much broader has a much broader application than what you even imagined at the start. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. We definitely have some sort of big picture dream, big ideas, but I think, they really, one of the groups sort of tested out the products in more private allied health companies and after school care facilities at schools, and more just using some of the generic resources we created, like feeling and coping cards and posters. So I think for us that really did help see and also think about how we pitch the resources to begin with, and making it a bit broader than just medical trauma, but to cover the other trauma experiences. But I think also on the note of the cyclone, that was the week we launched Frankie's Clubhouse to our clinicians. But thankfully, our team does the Birdie's Tree resources, where we have a book about cyclones, and that really showed us the need and demand that I think we had 160,000 views of our website in that week alone. We had national parenting experts sharing it online, requests from the news, ABC radio, or just randomly they were covering resources. Our team had got to the point with Birdie that we didn't even have to be widely sharing it ourselves. It was just getting picked up all over the place. And so again, it didn't end up happening that we were hit, but I think there was so much anxiety in that build up, and having that tool to safely talk to your children and explain what's happening and what the adults are doing to keep them safe is so valuable. So, yeah.
The other thing that the cyclone opened our eyes to was the intersection of Frankie and the natural disasters resources that we've got, and the additional challenges faced by families that have children with chronic illnesses or injuries, children in hospital. I remember one of our directors of the hospital talking to him during the Alfred weekend and saying, actually, the children in the hospital are safe. They're well prepared for. They'd really put in a lot of effort to make sure that was a safe, physically safe space, and they had the care they needed. But the children were still witnessing the preparations happening, and they were still watching their parents be concerned about what was happening at home, and they were still perhaps seeing things, on the TV. And so it really, I guess, not that we've moved anywhere further on that, but it's given us an appreciation for intersection of different types of disasters and how that can impact different groups, even kids that have, medical needs a lot differently to a child that's at home that doesn't, have any medical needs. So.
And then I think on that, why it's important for us to be flexible and adaptable is knowing that there will be increased domestic violence is often reported after natural disaster exposures or for children who are having chronic health conditions. There's a range of other traumatic experiences that can go on. So I think for us, it's just continuing to be creative and open with what we can do. But also, I think about some of the students had the big ideas of how do we make Frankie a household name? So can we have a Bluey-inspired city cat with Frankie that goes along the river, or at the roof of an ambulance where you can be lying there looking up at a friendly, smiling Frankie in the ambulance. So, yeah, I think that's the great thing. There's lots of creative options we can do to expand and grow the products as well.
Yeah. And what I love about that is this idea, and we talk about, I've had 30 years working with researchers and working in the innovation space, and in the sort of the startup ecosystem, when you've got a great idea, and most startups fail largely because no one finds out about them, no one cares about them. And the general rule is that, like, if you've solved a really compelling problem, you've got a solution that people love, you actually don't have to do too much of the marketing work because people love it so much they start telling people about it. And that sounds like, in some senses, in a really small little experience, you experienced that. All of a sudden there was a need, and you had a resource that you spent 10 years developing, and all of a sudden those two things came together and it just took off. And I think what we're trying to do within Impact Academy is try and work out how do we set that up? How do we get the right structures in place so that you can capitalize on that? Because clearly there's a lot of need. I mean, there's a lot of crap going on in the world. There's a lot of trauma happening all around the world. Whether you're in an advanced economy or in a developing economy. And kids are scared in all those different circumstances, for whether it's a first world problem or a third world problem. There's a lot of trauma there and fear. And parents are often quite concerned, and clinicians and professionals are quite concerned. And so, you've developed something that's going to help with that. And I think, what I'd love, maybe to finish on is well, what's the future look like for you guys? Where are you heading, and where do you hope this can get to?
Yeah, I think we've spent a lot of time sort of thinking about that. We've sort of done that sort of development phase of creating the initial suite of resources to help get an idea of the demand and need. For us now, I guess our goals are to continue developing the resources. So to be able to keep up with the demand of people going, can we please have a book for oncology, or can we please have a book for cardiac conditions, or the babies, sick babies in hospital. So wanting to have the resourcing and time to continue building these high quality resources. For me, another area that we're really sort of passionate about is the tricky part for us at the moment is balancing. We want to provide equitable, inclusive access to these resources, knowing that one of the biggest barriers to mental health support is costs, or the long, wait list to get in to see a mental health professional, or the stigma around that. And so we're wanting to be able to find ways that you can access as many things as possible for free online. For example, one of the students was talking about the teachers who are investing their own money to get resources to support their kids. So really wanting to have either free access or low cost access and timely access to resources to support children, families, and the people helping them. But at the same time, we need it to be a sustainable model. And, we're all doing this out of passion and fit it into all of the other work we do. And so we're really wanting to find a way that we can have some more sustainable funding to grow a core team of people who can be dedicated to working on this. But also we know it's not just about just having them available, that it does need structured supports and training or workforce development around what is trauma, what's the shared language, and what can we all do to help support that and use these safely and effectively. So for us, it's really, I think in the next 2 years, wanting to develop as many resources out there as possible to demonstrate that demand and need, and then find ways that we can make it sustainable and grow, but also continue building, the evidence and evaluation around that to show, I guess, return on investment and impact and that type of thing. Yeah.
I agree with Alex. She probably put it better than I can, but I think the will is there. As Alex said, currently where this stands, this is essentially a passion project. We are really lucky and fortunate to have leaders within our service that allow us to go ahead and work on these things in the spare time that we have, but Frankie's not the core role of either of our jobs, and it's the core role of nobody kind of within our service. So I think the main thing, is to figure out a way of, like, how are we going to create these books that Alex, said over 2 years we want to develop these good resources. To do that, we do need some type of investment, some type of funding coming from somewhere, because it costs money to print and illustrate and all of those types of things. And so for me, it all comes back down to, I guess, what is our stream of funding or income that we have access to or that we can apply for. Because at the moment, I think the scary part for us is that that's very uncertain. So we don't have a direct path. We can't sit here and say we have, this pocket of funding that we've applied for, that we've received, that will allow us to continue forward. So at the moment we are continuing forward, supporting and sharing and going and doing presentations and, directing people to the website. And I really hope that moving forward, we are able to, progress more.
Because actually I think the hardest thing at the moment is that we don't have a way to distribute them, or we haven't decided on a cost, point, or actually how we sell them, because it requires quite a large team just for Birdie's Tree alone to manage the printing and distribution. But it's really hard having to say no all the time. We're getting requests from clinicians in our own hospital, across Queensland, across Australia, internationally.
Every week, our Frankies.
Every week, it's like, how can we buy a Frankie toy? I've lost track of how many just adults want a Frankie toy, and we have to keep saying no. We don't have an option yet to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think that's, in a lot of the work that I do, working with researchers who have amazing ideas and have done the hard work. You've spent, if you look at all the resources gone in, there's millions of dollars, understanding the problem, developing solutions, trialing the solutions, getting evidence that the solutions work. And the challenge is that the skills you need to actually work out, well, how do you make a whole heap of books and soft toys, and training systems available to thousands of practitioners and clinicians and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of parents and children. They're a very different skill set. Yeah. And I think that's what we're trying to do within Impact Academy, is trying to combine those two things of people who've got good business acumen and are really passionate about trying to have an impact, versus combine that with people who are very strong domain knowledge and lived experience, understand the problem and understand the solution, and put those two things together. And I think it's when we work out how to do that at scale is when we actually can really try and get that value inflection from all this billions of dollars we do in research, in Australia, and tens of billions of dollars around the world, hundreds of billions of dollars around the world. So look, thank you so much for giving us your little baby, Frankie.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to be a part of the program. It was really valuable. We learnt a lot. Going to take a lot of it into the future, I think.
Yeah, great. So no, thank you for that. And maybe just when we finish, can you give us a plug for how do people find out more about Frankie?
Yes. So the best way to find out more about Frankie at the moment is, I think if you Google Frankie's Clubhouse, it normally comes up, or to go through the Children's Health Queensland website About Us page, and then that's where you can find the freely available books online, and other supporting resources and information.
Cool. And if there's a seriously rich person out there that really falls in love with Frankie, come and chat to Alex and Nikki.
Yes, please.
Cool. Thanks for your time, guys.
Thank you.
Much.